King Draven Blackfang had spent 3 months trying to kill the enemy commander. 3 months, 7 battles, thousands of warriors. And every time, the same young wolf defeated him. The battlefield smelled of wet earth and burning pine. Rain dripped from broken banners. Smoke rolled across Blackwater Valley in grey waves. Dead wolves lay scattered between shattered shields. The war should have ended today. Draven had finally cornered the enemy pack. Their forces were trapped against the cliffs, no escape, no reinforcements, no hope. Victory belonged to the king. At least that was what everyone believed. Then the enemy commander removed his helmet, and the world stopped. The young warrior couldn't have been older than 18. Dark hair, broad shoulders, steel-grey eyes. The same steel-grey eyes staring back at Draven from every mirror in his palace. For one impossible second, the king felt his heart stop, because the boy looked exactly like him. Not similar, not close, exactly. The battlefield fell silent. Even the rain seemed quieter. The young commander stared back, equally shocked, equally confused. Then another voice cut through the smoke. "Ryker!" A young woman sprinted across the battlefield. Twin blades at her hips, silver eyes, dark cloak. She reached the commander and grabbed his arm. The king's wolf froze instantly. Recognition, not fear, recognition. Because she looked familiar too, not identical, but close enough. Close enough to awaken memories buried beneath 18 years of regret. The young woman turned toward him. Hatred burned in her eyes. The kind of hatred built slowly, year after year, lie after lie. Then she pointed directly at the king and spoke words that shattered everything. That's hymns. Absolute silence. The battlefield held its breath. The young commander never looked away from Draven, neither did the woman. Then she delivered the sentence that changed the war. "The man who abandoned our mother." The king's blood turned cold, because there was only one woman they could mean. One ghost, one mistake. Aria. What Draven didn't know, what nobody on that battlefield knew, was that 18 years earlier he had rejected his mate before the entire kingdom, and while the nobles celebrated. His pregnant Luna disappeared into the night. He never saw her again. He never knew she carried twins. And now, the son he never met was leading the pack he had declared war on. But that wasn't the worst part. Because someone else knew the truth. Someone inside the kingdom. Someone powerful. Someone who had spent 18 years making sure father and children never found each other. And before this story ended, that secret would destroy a kingdom. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new werewolf tale, hidden heir story, or Lycan Kingdom drama. And tell us in the comments, if you discovered your greatest enemy was actually your own child, what would you do? Would you stop the war? Or would you finish what you started? Let us know below, because Draven's answer changes everything. Now let's go back to the moment one rejection set 18 years of secrets in motion. 18 years earlier, the great hall smelled of cedar smoke and hot iron. Hundreds of nobles filled the balconies. Warriors lined the walls. Torchlight flickered across ancient stone. At the center of the room stood King Draven Blackfang, the most powerful Lycan ruler on the continent, and kneeling before him was the woman destined to become his Luna, Aria Winterborn. She wore a silver gown embroidered with moonflowers. Long dark hair rested across her shoulders. Silver eyes looked up at him, hopeful, trusting, certain, and somehow that made everything worse. Because Draven had already made his decision. The kingdom needed a political alliance. The council demanded it. The nobles demanded it. And Aria was becoming inconvenient. The king stepped forward. The room fell silent. Then he spoke. "I reject Aria Winterborn as my mate before the moon goddess and before this kingdom." The words echoed across the chamber. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Aria's face lost all color. The bond snapped. Pain flashed through her eyes, yet she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. Instead, she simply stared at him, and somehow that hurt more than tears ever could. The silence stretched. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, then Aria smiled. Not happily, not sadly. The smile of someone finally understanding a terrible truth. The smile of someone realizing they were never truly wanted. For the first time all evening, Draven felt uncertain, because this wasn't the reaction he expected. Then Aria slowly rose to her feet, graceful, quiet, dignified. She looked at him one final time, then turned toward the palace doors. No argument, no scene, no plea, just goodbye. What nobody noticed was the brief movement of her hand across her stomach. A tiny gesture, easy to miss, meaningless to everyone watching. Except it wasn't, because at that exact moment, Aria already carried the king's children. And hidden among the cheering nobles above, one man smiled. Lord Malric, the king's most trusted advisor. The architect of everything. And as Aria disappeared into the night, Malric quietly signaled a hooded figure waiting near the palace entrance. A signal that meant only one thing. The hunt was about to begin. The hunt began before midnight. Rain hammered the palace rooftops. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Most of the kingdom slept peacefully. Aria did not. The former Luna sat alone inside a small guest chamber in the eastern wing. A single candle flickered beside her. Its flame danced whenever cold wind slipped through cracks in the stone walls. The room smelled of melted wax and rain-soaked cedar. Temporary, cold, empty, exactly how she felt. The rejection still echoed through her chest, not as pain anymore, as absence. The place where a bond once existed. Outside the window, rainwater slid down the glass. Inside, her hand rested against her stomach. Again, the gesture came naturally, instinctively, protectively. Something felt different. She couldn't explain it, only feel it. A strange certainty, a quiet awareness, life. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it gave her something she hadn't felt all day. Hope. Then a sharp knock sounded at the door. 3 quick taps. Aria frowned. Nobody should be visiting this late. The knock came again, more urgent. She crossed the room, opened the door, and immediately froze. A palace maid stood outside, young, drenched, terrified. The girl shoved a folded parchment into Aria's hands, then looked nervously down the corridor, as if expecting someone to appear. "Leave," the girl whispered, the word barely audible above the storm. Aria blinked, confused. The maid shook her head desperately. Tears filled her eyes. Then she whispered again, "Leave now." Fear, real fear. The kind people couldn't fake. Before Aria could react, the maid turned and ran, vanishing into darkness. Aria looked down at the parchment, unfolded it, read the message, and felt her blood turn cold. Only 4 words, "They're coming for you." Nothing else, no signature, no explanation, no name. Yet somehow, she believed it immediately, because for weeks, something had felt wrong. The strange stares, the whispers that stopped when she approached, the guards suddenly stationed outside her rooms, the servants avoiding her eyes. The pieces had always existed. She simply hadn't understood the picture, until now. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy footsteps. More than one person, moving quickly, toward her room. Aria didn't hesitate. She grabbed her cloak, extinguished the candle, and slipped through the hidden servants' passage concealed behind a wardrobe. The narrow tunnel smelled of dust and damp stone. Darkness swallowed everything. Only her heartbeat remained, fast, loud, dangerously loud. Moments later, the door to her room exploded open. Voices followed, male voices, armed voices, search everywhere. Not palace servants, not guards, soldiers. Aria's pulse quickened. Someone wanted her found, or dead, possibly both. The tunnel twisted beneath the palace. She moved quickly, one hand trailing along rough stone, the other resting protectively over her stomach. Minutes later, she emerged behind the royal stables. Rain drenched her instantly. Lightning illuminated the courtyard. And there, standing beneath a stone archway, was Lord Malric. The advisor wasn't supposed to be there, especially not at midnight. Yet he stood calmly beneath the rain, watching, waiting, as if he knew exactly where she would emerge. Aria stepped backward, instinctively. Malric smiled, not warmly, not kindly. The smile of a man watching years of planning finally come together. The sight sent ice through her veins. Because for the first time, she understood. This wasn't about the rejection. The rejection was only the first move. Then Malric lifted a hand, and shadows emerged from the rain. 5 armed men, moving directly toward her. The advisor never looked away. "Bring her to me." Aria ran. Immediately, Mud splashed beneath her boots, rain blinded her, branches whipped against her face. Behind her came shouts, then pursuit. The kingdom wasn't trying to exile her, the kingdom was trying to erase her, and if they discovered the truth growing inside her, the children would die too. The chase lasted 3 days. 3 days of rain, 3 days of hiding, 3 days without proper food or sleep. The assassins never stopped. Whenever she rested, they found her. Whenever she hid, they tracked her. Whenever she gained distance, they closed it. Someone had supplied them with maps, routes, safe houses, information. Too much information. Which meant Malric wasn't acting alone. Then on the 4th morning, everything changed. Aria stood atop a ridge overlooking the kingdom. The storm had finally passed. Golden sunlight broke through the clouds. The capital sat far below, peaceful, beautiful, completely unaware. Pain suddenly struck her stomach. Sharp, unexpected, she doubled over, one hand gripping a nearby tree. The sensation lasted only seconds. But it left certainty behind, absolute certainty. She wasn't guessing anymore. She wasn't hoping anymore. She knew. Twins. The word arrived with startling clarity. Twins, 2 heartbeats, 2 lives, 2 children. Draven's children, the king's heirs. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time since the rejection, she smiled, a real smile, small, fragile, hopeful. Then a crossbow bolt slammed into the tree beside her head. Wood exploded. Aria spun around. A second bolt struck the ground near her feet. A third followed. The assassins had found her again. And standing among the trees, watching from the shadows, was a hooded figure. The figure Malric had signaled outside the palace. The leader, the hunter, the one who never seemed to lose her trail. The figure slowly lowered the crossbow, then spoke for the first time. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The voice was calm, cold. Female. Aria backed away. The figure stepped forward. "Give me the children." Silence. The world seemed to stop, because suddenly, the hunt finally made sense. They weren't chasing Aria. They were chasing the twins. And somehow, Malric already knew they existed. The hooded woman pulled back her hood. Scarred face, golden eyes, expressionless, a professional killer. Then she delivered a sentence that changed everything. "Lord Malric says the kingdom can survive losing a Luna." A pause. "The kingdom cannot survive those children being born." And suddenly one terrifying question appeared. What did Malric know about the twins that even Aria didn't know? The answer would change the fate of every kingdom on the continent. Aria ran. The question followed her through the forest. What did Malric know? The answer had to be terrifying, because people did not spend kingdoms hunting unborn children without a reason. The pine forest blurred around her. Roots caught at her boots. Branches clawed at her cloak. Behind her came the sounds of pursuit, not rushed, not desperate, confident. The assassins knew something she didn't, and that frightened her more than the crossbows. Then the ground disappeared beneath her feet. Aria plunged down a steep embankment. Cold water exploded around her. The river swallowed her instantly. The current was brutal, fast, violent, unforgiving. She surfaced once, twice, then vanished downstream. The assassins reached the riverbank moments later. The scarred woman stared into the rushing water, expressionless. One of the hunters approached. "Did we lose her?" The woman never looked away. "No." Silence. Then a strange smile appeared, small, confident. Fate just moved the game piece. The statement made no sense, not yet, but before this story ended, it would. The river carried Aria far beyond the kingdom, far beyond the assassins, far beyond everything she knew. When she finally woke, the air smelled different, cleaner, colder, mountain air. She opened her eyes slowly. Wooden ceiling, stone fireplace, the smell of herbs, a healer's cabin. An elderly woman sat nearby grinding leaves into a bowl. Wrinkled hands, sharp eyes, the sort of eyes that noticed everything. The healer looked up, then nodded. "Good." Aria blinked. Confused, the old woman smiled faintly. "You and the babies survived." The words hit immediately. Not baby, babies, plural, confirmation. The twins were real. The healer continued. "The river nearly killed you." A pause. But something kept them alive. Aria looked down. Her hands moved protectively across her stomach. The healer watched carefully, then asked, Who are you running from? The answer should have been simple. Instead, Aria realized she didn't know anymore, because this was bigger than a rejected mate, bigger than palace politics, bigger than a jealous noble. Something hidden existed beneath everything, something Malric feared. The healer seemed to read the thoughts crossing her face, then quietly asked, "Did anyone ever tell you who your grandmother was?" Aria froze, because the question felt strange, random, unexpected. The healer nodded slowly. Exactly. No one had. Then the old woman leaned closer. "The children aren't being hunted because of their father." Silence. The room seemed to grow colder. The healer lowered her voice. "They're being hunted because of you." The statement landed hard, because it shattered every assumption, every prediction, every explanation. Aria stared, waiting, needing answers. The healer sighed, then looked toward the mountains beyond the window. Some bloodlines disappear. The first piece. Some bloodlines are erased. The second piece. And some bloodlines are hunted. The third piece. The old woman met her eyes. "You belong to the last one." The room became silent, because suddenly the mystery wasn't about the king. It wasn't about the twins. It wasn't even about Malric. It was about Aria. And for the first time, she wondered whether she knew herself at all. Months passed. Winter arrived. Snow covered the mountains. Ice formed along the rivers. The twins grew strong. Healthy, unusually healthy. The healer noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. Ryker learned to walk earlier than expected. Lyra learned to speak earlier than expected. Both children seemed aware, observant, different. At first, nobody mentioned it. Then strange things started happening. When Ryker cried, the village wolves gathered outside the cabin. Not one or two, dozens. They sat quietly, watching, waiting. The first time it happened, people laughed. The fifth time, nobody laughed anymore. Then came Lyra. At barely 3 years old, she began predicting storms. Not guessing. Predicting. Hours before clouds appeared. Hours before rain arrived. The little girl would simply point toward the horizon and say, "Storm." And somehow, she was always right. The village began whispering. Legends, prophecies, old stories. The twins were becoming something. Nobody knew what, but everyone felt it, especially Aria, because every year, the fear grew, not fear of her children, fear that Malric might discover where they were. 10 years later, the Frostclaw village no longer whispered. Now it watched. Because the twins had become extraordinary. The training ground smelled of sweat and pine sap. Wooden swords clashed beneath a bright summer sky. Ryker stood at the center of the field. 17 warriors surrounded him, every one of them older, every one of them stronger, at least physically. The young wolf smiled. Then the fight began. It lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, 17 warriors lay flat on their backs, groaning, laughing, complaining. Ryker stood untouched. The prediction broke again. The strongest warrior in the village wasn't an alpha, wasn't an elder, wasn't a war chief. It was an 18-year-old boy. Across the field, Lyra watched everything, silver eyes studying every movement, every weakness, every mistake. Where Ryker mastered combat, Lyra mastered people, strategies, patterns. The girl noticed things others missed. Tiny details, hidden motives, future problems. And that frightened Aria, because every day the twins became harder to hide. Then a horn sounded from the northern watchtower. Once, twice, 3 times, the signal for visitors. The entire village turned. A scout raced down the hill, breathing hard, excited. Riders approaching. The old alpha frowned. "How many?" The answer changed everything. 20. Silence. Then, "They carry royal banners." The world stopped. Because there was only one kingdom arrogant enough to send royal banners into Frostclaw territory. Blackfang. The kingdom Aria had fled. The kingdom where Draven still ruled. And for the first time in 18 years, the past had finally found them. The past arrived at sunset. 20 riders emerged from the northern pass. Black horses, black cloaks, Blackfang banners. The silver wolf crest snapped sharply in the wind. Every conversation in Frostclaw village died instantly. Children stopped playing. Hunters lowered their bows. Warriors moved toward the gates. The smell of pine smoke suddenly felt heavier, more dangerous, because everyone knew what those banners meant. The kingdom had finally found them. The old alpha stood atop the village wall, Aria beside him, Ryker and Lyra slightly behind. The riders approached slowly, no weapons drawn, no battle formation, no obvious threat, which somehow made it worse. The old alpha narrowed his eyes, then frowned. Something wasn't right. Royal envoys never traveled this lightly, especially not during a border war. Then the lead rider removed his hood. The entire wall became silent, because everyone recognized him, General Marcus Thorn, one of King Draven's oldest commanders, the same general who had led armies for nearly 20 years, the same general famous for never delivering messages personally. Yet here he was, standing before Frostclaw territory. Alone, Marcus stopped his horse, then slowly raised both hands, empty, a sign of peace. The old alpha didn't lower his guard. "What do you want?" The general looked directly toward Ryker, then toward Lyra, then toward Aria. Recognition flashed across his face. Not surprise, recognition. As though he had finally found something he'd been searching for. Then he spoke. "The king requests a meeting." Silence, absolute silence. The statement echoed across the village. Aria felt her stomach tighten, because there was only one question that mattered. Why now? Then Marcus added, "He wishes to avoid further bloodshed." The old alpha laughed, a short, humorless laugh. "The king declared war." Marcus nodded. "I know. The king invaded our territory." Another nod. "I know." The old alpha stepped forward. "Then why should we trust him?" For the first time, Marcus hesitated. The general looked genuinely uncomfortable, then answered quietly, "You shouldn't." The honesty shocked everyone, even Aria, because that wasn't how diplomats spoke. That wasn't how kingdoms negotiated. The old alpha noticed too. Then Marcus delivered the sentence that changed everything. "The king recently learned something." Silence. The general's eyes moved toward the twins, then back to Aria. "He believes he has spent 18 years fighting the wrong enemy." The world seemed to stop, because suddenly everyone understood. Draven knew, or at least suspected. The truth was reaching him, finally. Then Marcus reached into his saddlebag. Slowly, carefully, every warrior on the wall tensed. Instead of a weapon, he produced a sealed letter. Royal wax. Seal. The king's personal mark. Marcus held it up. "For Aria Winterborn." The village became silent again, because 18 years had passed since anyone had spoken that name beside a Blackfang banner. Aria stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. The old alpha looked toward her. The decision was hers, only hers. Slowly, Aria stepped forward, accepted the letter. The parchment felt strangely heavy, as though 18 years weighed inside it. She broke the seal, opened the letter, and began reading. The first line made her freeze, not because it was dramatic, not because it was romantic, because it was simple. "Aria, I think I've spent 18 years believing a lie." The words blurred. "Not from magic, not from tears. Shock," the letter continued. "If what I've learned is true, then I owe you more apologies than I can fit onto these pages. I do not ask for forgiveness. I have not earned it. I do not ask for trust. I have not earned that either. But I am asking for the truth." The world around her disappeared. Only the words remained. Then she reached the final paragraph, and her blood turned cold. Because Draven had written something impossible. Something he should not know. Something only a handful of people knew. "Someone tried to kill our children before they were born. I intend to discover who. And when I do, they will answer for every year stolen from us." The letter slipped slightly in her hands, because suddenly, one terrifying realization emerged. Draven was investigating, and if Draven was investigating, then Malric was in danger, which meant Malric would act. Fast. Desperate people always did. Unfortunately, nobody understood how desperate he truly was. 3 nights later, Lord Malric disappeared. The advisor left the capital under darkness. No farewell, no announcement, no explanation. One moment he occupied chambers beside the throne. The next, they were empty. At first nobody noticed. Then servants began asking questions, then guards, then ministers, then the king. The search began immediately. By dawn, the truth emerged. Malric had taken treasury seals, military records, defense maps, supply routes, royal correspondence. Enough information to cripple a kingdom. The discovery stunned everyone, especially Draven, because it confirmed his worst fear. The man had been planning this for years. Then a captain arrived carrying another report, breathless, terrified. The king looked up. "What now?" The captain swallowed, then answered, "We found a camp." Silence, a large one. More silence. The king stood. "How large?" The answer changed everything. 10,000. The room froze. The captain continued. "Private soldiers." Pause. "Wolves loyal to Malric." Another pause. "They've been gathering for years." The realization landed like a hammer. Every missing shipment, every unexplained expense, every strange report. All of it suddenly made sense. Malric wasn't preparing to survive exposure. He was preparing for war. And now, the war was beginning. Not between kingdoms, not between packs. Between the crown and the man who had hidden behind it for 18 years. And somewhere beyond the northern mountains. The twins had no idea they were about to become the only people capable of saving the kingdom their father nearly lost. The kingdom began falling apart before the first battle was fought. That was Malric's real talent. Not warfare, not politics, control. For 18 years he had quietly moved pieces across the board. Now those pieces were moving on their own, and the crown was finally seeing them. The capital smelled of smoke. Not battle smoke, panic smoke. Merchants were burning records. Nobles were destroying letters. Officials were checking loyalties. Nobody knew who belonged to Malric, and that uncertainty frightened them more than any army. King Draven stood inside the war chamber. Maps covered every wall, supply routes, fortifications, mountain passes. Most of them useless now, because Malric had stolen copies of everything. The king stared at the northern frontier, then asked the question nobody wanted to answer. How many commanders defected? The room remained silent. That silence told him enough. Too many. Far too many. Then General Marcus stepped forward. More every hour. The king clenched his jaw, because Malric wasn't stealing a kingdom. He was taking one apart, piece by piece. Then another messenger burst into the chamber. Mud covered his cloak, blood covered his hands. The king immediately knew the news would be bad. What happened? The messenger struggled for breath, then answered. The eastern gates. Silence. They opened from the inside. The room froze. The messenger continued. Malric's soldiers were already waiting. The realization landed instantly. This wasn't rebellion, this was a coup. A coup planned for years, and it had finally begun. The attack came after midnight. The city slept. The enemy didn't. Rain fell heavily across the capital. Thunder rolled over the palace towers. Most guards never saw the attack coming, because the attack wasn't coming from outside, it was already inside. Malric's planted soldiers struck simultaneously. Barracks, watchtowers, armories, signal stations, every strategic location. The kingdom's defenses collapsed within minutes. Palace bells erupted across the city. Alarm horns followed, then came screaming. The sound spread rapidly through the streets. King Draven woke to chaos. The smell of smoke filled the royal quarters. Outside his chamber, steel clashed against steel. The king grabbed his sword, pulled on armor, and kicked open the door. The hallway looked like a battlefield. Bodies, blood, broken shields. His personal guard fought desperately, outnumbered, overwhelmed, dying. The king joined them instantly. His blade cut through the first attacker, then the second, then the third. The corridor became chaos. For a moment, the old warrior returned. The king who had survived 100 battles. The king who had conquered kingdoms. But numbers mattered, and Malric had numbers. Every fallen attacker revealed 2 more, then 3 more, then 5. The attack never stopped, because it was never meant to. The objective wasn't victory, the objective was exhaustion. Eventually, even kings grow tired. Eventually, even kings bleed. A spear tore across Draven's ribs. Another struck his shoulder. Blood soaked his armor. The king stumbled, caught himself, kept fighting. Then Marcus appeared. The general's face was covered in blood. Not all of it his own. "We have to leave." Draven ignored him. The king cut down another soldier. Marcus grabbed his arm. "Hard. We have to leave now." The king finally looked around. Really looked. The palace was lost. His guard was dead. His soldiers were scattered. His banners burned. And somewhere in the city, Malric was already celebrating. The realization tasted like poison. Then another explosion shook the palace. Stone cracked. Fire spread. Marcus pointed toward a hidden doorway. The river tunnels. The king hated the idea immediately, because retreat felt like surrender, but dying here would be worse. The kingdom needed a king, even a defeated one. Draven nodded once, then followed Marcus into the darkness. The river tunnels smelled of damp stone. Ancient water flowed beneath the palace, cold, black, relentless. The passages had existed for centuries, emergency escape routes. Most kings never used them. Tonight, Draven became the exception. The king moved through darkness, blood dripping from his armor. Every step hurt. Every breath hurt. The tunnel eventually opened onto the river itself. Rain hammered the water. The current surged violently. Marcus looked toward the king, then froze. An arrow protruded from his chest. The general blinked once, twice, then collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Draven spun, crossbows, at least 20, Malric's soldiers. Waiting, the king understood immediately. The tunnels weren't a secret anymore. Nothing was. Then another bolt flew. Draven jumped. The river swallowed him instantly. Ice-cold water exploded around him. The current seized him, dragged him downstream. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the capital burning behind him. The river carried him for miles, perhaps more. Time disappeared. The world became freezing water, pain, darkness, then nothing. When he opened his eyes again, snow surrounded him. The storm had ended. Morning sunlight reflected across white hills. His body lay half-buried along a frozen riverbank. The king tried to move, failed. Everything hurt. The wounds, the cold, the exhaustion. He looked nothing like a king anymore. No crown, no cloak, no army. Only a wounded wolf lying in the snow. Then footsteps approached, crunching softly. A border guard emerged from the trees, young, alert, armed. The Frostclaw warrior stopped immediately. The guard studied him, confused, suspicious, then cautiously approached. The king expected recognition. It never came, because without armor, without banners, without a crown, he was simply another wounded man. The guard knelt beside him, examined the injuries, then frowned. "You're lucky." The king tried to laugh. It came out as a cough. The guard looked toward the village in the distance, then back toward him, finally making a decision. "We need to tell the queen." The words barely registered, because the king only heard one thing: queen. And suddenly one impossible thought entered his mind. Aria, not Luna, not exile, not fugitive. Queen. The world faded again, darkness returned. And somewhere far away, the woman he had not seen in 18 years was about to decide whether he lived or died. Aria stared at the unconscious man. For a long time, she said nothing. The healer's cabin smelled of pine resin and crushed herbs. Snow tapped softly against the windows. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. Everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Because lying on the wooden bed was the man who had changed her life 18 years ago. King Draven Blackfang. Her former mate. The father of her children. The man she had spent years trying to forget. He looked different, older, more tired. The black hair carried streaks of silver now. New scars crossed his face. The confidence she remembered seemed gone, replaced by exhaustion. The healer finished wrapping his wounds, then looked toward Aria. "He's losing blood." "Silence," the old woman continued. "If he doesn't receive treatment immediately, he won't survive the night." The statement hung heavily in the room, because everyone already knew the obvious answer. Let him die. The king had rejected her. His kingdom hunted her. His war threatened her children. No one would blame her. No one would question her. The old alpha certainly wouldn't. Neither would Frostclaw. Then the healer spoke again, quietly. "What's your decision?" The room became still. Aria looked at Draven, then toward the window, toward the village, toward the future. And suddenly she realized something. If Draven died here, Ryker and Lyra would never hear the truth from him. They would spend the rest of their lives believing the worst version of the story, and that burden would become theirs, not his. The realization settled heavily. Then Aria finally answered, "Save him." The healer nodded, not surprised, almost relieved. The old alpha exhaled slowly, then asked, "Why?" Aria looked toward the unconscious king. Her expression remained unreadable. Then she answered, "Not for him, for the twins." The healing took 3 days, 3 days of fever, 3 days of nightmares, 3 days of drifting between sleep and memory. The king spoke often while unconscious, names, places, battles, regrets. The healer heard everything. So did Aria. One name appeared more than any other. Her name, again and again and again. The pattern unsettled her, because regret was harder to hate than cruelty. On the 4th morning, the fever finally broke. Sunlight filtered through the cabin windows. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the village below. Draven opened his eyes. For several seconds, he didn't understand where he was. The wooden ceiling, the fire, the unfamiliar room, nothing made sense. Then memory returned. The coup, the attack, the river, Malric. The king tried sitting up. Pain immediately stopped him. A voice spoke nearby. "Don't!" Draven froze, because he recognized that voice instantly. Even after 18 years, even after everything, slowly, he turned his head. Aria sat beside the window. Silver eyes, dark hair, calm expression. Real, not a dream, not a memory. Real. The king stared, unable to speak, unable to breathe, because he had imagined this moment 1,000 times. None of those versions looked like reality. Finally, one word escaped him, Aria. The woman remained silent, not angry, not warm, simply waiting. The distance between them felt enormous, not measured in feet, measured in years. Then footsteps approached outside. 2 sets, confident, familiar. The cabin door opened, and the world stopped. Ryker entered first, tall, broad-shouldered, steel-gray eyes, every resemblance impossible to ignore. Lyra followed, silver eyes studying everything, watching, measuring. Neither knew Draven had awakened. Not yet. Then Ryker looked up and froze. The king froze too. Father and son stared at one another, neither speaking, neither moving. The resemblance hit harder up close. The same eyes, the same jawline, the same posture, the same stubborn expression. For one impossible moment, it felt like looking backward through time. Then Lyra stepped beside her brother. Her gaze shifted between them once, twice, and suddenly she understood. The room became silent. No shouting, no dramatic revelation, only realization, slow, painful, unavoidable. Draven looked toward them, then toward Aria, then back again. His voice barely worked. The words died before finishing, because he already knew, and they already knew. No explanation was necessary. No evidence was necessary. The truth stood in front of all of them, 18 years late. Yet impossible to deny. Nobody spoke. The silence carried everything. The lost birthdays, the missed childhoods, the unanswered questions, the empty years. All of it lived inside that silence. Finally, Ryker broke it. Not with anger, not with accusations. A simple question. "Did you know?" The king understood immediately. "Did you know we existed?" Draven closed his eyes, pain crossed his face. Then he answered honestly, "No." Silence. The young warrior studied him carefully, searching for deception, finding none. Because the truth sounded different. The truth carried weight, and this truth was crushing him. Then Lyra asked the second question, the harder question. "If you had known," pause, "would you have come?" The room held its breath, because this answer mattered, more than titles, more than kingdoms, more than war. Draven looked directly at both of them, then answered without hesitation, "I would have crossed every mountain on this continent." Silence followed, long silence. Not because they believed him, not because they didn't, because they wanted to. And wanting to trust someone was often harder than trusting them. Then another voice shattered the moment. A scout, running, breathless, terrified. The young wolf burst through the cabin door. Mud covered his boots. Snow covered his cloak. His face had gone pale. The room immediately knew. Something terrible had happened. The scout struggled for breath. Then finally Malric. Every person in the room went still. The scout swallowed hard, then delivered the news, "He has the capital." Silence. Absolute silence. The young wolf continued, "He controls the walls." Pause. "The army." Another pause. "The treasury." Then came the final blow. "And he's marching north." The realization landed instantly. Malric wasn't running anymore. He was hunting. And this time, he wasn't coming for Aria. He wasn't coming for Draven. He was coming for all of them, and, for the first time, father and children found themselves standing on the same side of a war, not because they trusted each other, not because they forgave each other, because survival no longer gave them another choice. The alliance formed without trust, without forgiveness, without promises, which was exactly why it worked. The Frostclaw Council gathered that evening inside the Great Hall. The room smelled of burning pine and wet wool. Snow tapped against the roof overhead. Warriors lined the walls. Elders filled the benches. At the center stood 4 people: Aria, Ryker, Lyra, and King Draven Blackfang. The silence felt heavier than armor, because everyone understood the situation. The kingdom was falling. Malric controlled the capital, and an army was already marching north. The old Alpha spoke first. "How many?" Draven answered immediately. "At least 12,000. The room shifted uneasily, because that number mattered. 12,000 wasn't a rebellion, it wasn't a raid, it wasn't even a civil war, it was an invasion," the king continued. "He has the treasury. The first problem, he has the supply routes. The second problem, he has commanders loyal to him. The third problem." Every sentence made the situation worse. Then Ryker finally spoke. "What does he want?" The question lingered, because deep down, everyone already knew. Draven looked toward Aria, then toward the twins. The answer came quietly. "Your family." Silence, absolute silence. The king continued. "He spent 18 years trying to keep us apart." A pause. "If the truth becomes public." Another pause. "He loses everything." The realization settled across the room, because Malric wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to survive, and desperate men were dangerous. The meeting lasted deep into the night. Strategies, routes, supplies, defenses, the discussions never stopped. Yet something remained noticeably absent: trust. Whenever Draven offered a suggestion, the twins questioned it. Whenever he explained something, they challenged it. Whenever he spoke, distance remained. The king noticed. Of course he noticed, yet he never complained. Never defended himself, never demanded respect, because for the first time in years, he understood something important. Trust wasn't owed, it was earned, and he hadn't earned theirs yet. Then Lyra spread a map across the table. The kingdom unfolded beneath candlelight: mountains, rivers, roads, fortresses. The girl studied it carefully, then pointed toward 3 locations. "These fall first." The room leaned closer. The old Alpha frowned. "Why?" Lyra's finger moved across the map. "Because Malric expects us to attack the capital." The first piece. "So he'll strengthen the capital." The second piece. "And weaken everything supporting it." The third piece. The room became silent, because the logic was flawless. The girl continued. "We don't attack the head." A pause. "We remove the limbs." Draven stared. Not because the strategy surprised him, because it reminded him of someone. Aria, the same calm confidence, the same ability to see patterns nobody else noticed. Then another realization arrived. His daughter was brilliant, and he had missed every moment of her becoming that way. The thought hurt more than any wound. The campaign began before sunrise. Snow covered the roads. The air tasted like iron. War banners snapped in the wind. Frostclaw warriors marched south. Beside them marched former royal soldiers loyal to Draven. The combined force wasn't large, but it was smart, and Lyra intended to keep it that way. The first fortress fell in 3 hours. The second surrendered without a fight. The third never saw them coming. One by one, Malric's supply network collapsed. The prediction failed. The advisor expected a siege. Instead he got starvation. Expected brute force. Instead he got precision. Every day another road disappeared. Every day another warehouse burned. Every day another commander defected. And every day the pressure increased. Then Malric finally realized who was leading the strategy. The report arrived during dinner. The advisor listened quietly, expressionless, until one sentence changed everything. "The daughter is directing the campaign." Silence. The advisor lowered his cup, then smiled. Not happily, not confidently. The smile of a man recognizing a threat, because suddenly, the twins weren't children anymore. They were opponents, real opponents, and for the first time, Malric looked worried. Weeks passed. The kingdom slowly turned against him. Villages rebelled. Commanders deserted. Citizens refused taxes. The lies he'd built for 18 years began collapsing. Then came the moment he feared most. The truth reached the people. Not rumors, not whispers. Truth, the hidden heirs, the rejected Luna, the assassins, the stolen years, everything. The story spread through taverns, markets, churches, barracks, everywhere. And once people learned the truth, something unexpected happened. They became angry. Not at Aria, not at the twins, at Malric. 'Cause kingdoms tolerated mistakes. They did not tolerate betrayal. The realization terrified him. Because armies can be controlled, people are harder. Then another report arrived. The advisor opened it, read it once, then again. His hands tightened. The message was simple. The Northern Army has joined Draven. Silence. Another letter followed. The Western Army has joined Draven. Then another. The Southern commanders refuse your orders. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Lord Malric felt fear. Real fear, because the kingdom was waking up. And waking kingdoms were dangerous. Before we continue, a quick question. If you were Ryker or Lyra, would you forgive a father who never came looking for you? Or would 18 years be too much to forgive? Tell us in the comments, because what happens next changes the future of every character in this story. Now, let's continue. The final march began at dawn. The capital appeared on the horizon by midday. Massive soulstone walls, watchtowers, iron gates. Everything looked exactly as Draven remembered. Except for one thing. Enemy banners flew above it. His kingdom, his city. His home, taken. The sight hit harder than expected. Then Ryker rode beside him. The young warrior looked toward the walls, toward the city, toward the battlefield waiting ahead. Finally, he asked a question. A simple question. One that caught Draven completely off guard. Was it worth it? The king frowned. What? The rejection. Silence. The wind moved softly across the plain. Thousands of warriors prepared behind them. Yet suddenly none of that mattered. Only the question. Was it worth it? Draven stared toward the city, then answered honestly. No. The word came immediately. No hesitation, no excuses, no kingdom, a pause, no throne, another pause, no alliance. The king looked toward his son. Nothing was worth losing you. For several seconds, Ryker said nothing. Then he nodded once. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but something. A beginning. And sometimes beginnings mattered more than endings. Ahead of them, the capital gates opened, and Malric's army marched out to meet them. The battle for the kingdom had finally arrived. The battle began with silence. Not horns, not war cries. Silence. Two armies faced each other across the frozen plain outside the capital. The winter wind carried the smell of snow and steel. Thousands of warriors stood ready. Spear, shields, bows, wolves, all waiting, all watching. The city walls loomed behind Malric's forces. The same walls Draven had spent half his life defending. Now they belonged to someone else. The advisor rode forward slowly. Black armor, black horse, black cloak. The image of authority. The image of control. The image he had spent 18 years creating. The armies parted around him. Nobody spoke. Because everyone wanted to see this. The king. The traitor. The final confrontation. Malric stopped 50 yards from Draven. Then smiled. The same smile. The same carefully practiced expression. The expression that had fooled a kingdom. You survived. Draven stared. No anger. No shouting. No threats. Only certainty. Because at last, he could see the truth clearly. The advisor had never served the kingdom. Only himself. Malric glanced toward Ryker, then Lyra. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by something uglier. Fear. Real fear. The twins noticed. So did Draven. Then Malric laughed softly. You should have stayed hidden. Silence. The advisor's gaze remained fixed on the twins. I spent years trying to prevent this. There it was, the confession. Not hidden, not denied. The truth. Ryker's jaw tightened. Lyra's eyes narrowed. But neither spoke, because Malric wasn't finished. The advisor spread his arms, as though presenting evidence. Look at them. A pause. One has the king's face. Another pause. The other has her bloodline, the final piece. His voice darkened. Together, they become something dangerous. The battlefield grew still. Because for the first time, Malric was saying what nobody understood. Then he pointed directly at Aria. You never knew, did you? The words hit her immediately. The advisor smiled. A cruel smile. A triumphant smile. The healer told you part of the truth. Silence, but not all of it. The wind moved through the battlefield. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. Then Malric delivered the revelation. The Winterborn bloodline once chose kings. The first peace, they decided which rulers remained in power. The second peace, they could unite packs. The third peace, his eyes shifted toward the twins, and your children inherited both bloodlines. The battlefield remained silent, because suddenly everything made sense. The hunt, the assassins, the obsession, the fear. The twins represented something larger than a kingdom, something larger than a throne. A future Malric couldn't control, and that was why he tried to destroy them. Then Lyra spoke. For the first time, quietly, calmly, you ruined thousands of lives. The advisor smiled. To save the kingdom? No. The girl's voice never changed. To keep power. The smile disappeared, instantly, because truth had a way of doing that. Then Lyra raised her hand, a simple gesture. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. The signal, the trap. Signal horns erupted across the hills. Once, twice, 3 times. Malric's expression changed, immediately. Because answering horns sounded behind him, not ahead, behind. The advisor turned, confusion appearing for the first time. Then came panic. Supply wagons burned beyond the city walls. Watchtowers erupted in flames. Gatehouses changed banners. His own commanders were turning against him. Lyra had spent weeks dismantling everything, one piece at a time, one weakness at a time. The battle was already won. Malric simply hadn't realized it yet. The prediction shattered. The advisor expected a siege. Instead, he had walked into an execution. Then Ryker drew his sword. Steel reflected pale winter sunlight. The young warrior looked toward the enemy army. Then forward. Advance. The battlefield exploded. Thousands of warriors surged forward. Wolves roared. Arrows darkened the sky. The final battle for the kingdom had begun. Draven fought beside Ryker for the first time. Father and son moved through the battlefield together. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but effectively. Years of separation couldn't erase instinct. The king protected his son's flank. The son protected his father's, again and again and again. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The soldiers noticed, the enemy noticed, even they noticed. Yet neither spoke, because there wasn't time. The battle swallowed everything. Hours passed. The city gates fell. The outer walls fell. The western towers surrendered. One defense after another collapsed. Exactly as Lyra predicted. Exactly as Malric feared. Then the fighting narrowed. Street by street, courtyard by courtyard, until only one place remained. The throne hall, the heart of the kingdom. The place where everything began, and the place where everything would end. Because waiting inside was Lord Malric, and he wasn't surrendering, not yet. The throne hall smelled of smoke, not cedar, not torch oil, smoke, the kind left behind when kingdoms burn. Broken banners lay scattered across the floor. Shattered, stained glass windows littered the stone. The great silver wolf crest above the throne had cracked down the middle. Everything looked wounded, just like the kingdom itself. Malric stood at the far end of the chamber, alone, at least at first glance. Black armor, black cloak, black sword, the same advisor, the same manipulator, the same man who had stolen 18 years. Yet something had changed. The confidence was gone. The smile was gone. Only desperation remained, and desperate men were the most dangerous. Draven entered first, then Ryker, then Lyra. Aria followed behind them. The remaining warriors secured the hall. The giant doors slammed shut. The sound echoed like a final judgment. Nobody spoke, because words felt unnecessary. The years spoke for themselves. The kingdom spoke for itself. The dead spoke for themselves. Finally, Malric laughed. A strange laugh, a tired laugh, the laugh of a man standing at the edge of defeat. So this is how it ends. Draven stepped forward. No, silence. The king's eyes never left him. This is how it started. The words landed heavy. True, because everything traced back to one choice. One lie, one manipulation, one advisor. Malric shook his head. You still don't understand. The king didn't answer. The advisor continued. I saved you. Silence. I saved the kingdom. More silence. I prevented chaos when Sir spoke. No. The girl stepped forward, calm, controlled. Dangerous. You created it. The words cut deeper than any sword. Malric's face hardened. The last mask finally broke. You think people want truth? His voice rose. You think kingdoms survive truth? The advisor pointed toward the throne. They survive control. The confession echoed through the hall, raw, ugly, honest. For the first time, there were no lies left. Then Malric moved, fast, much faster than anyone expected. The sword flashed, steel exploded toward Lyra, the closest target, the most dangerous target, the strategist, the threat. Ryker intercepted immediately. His blade collided with Malric's. Sparks erupted. The fight began. The battle inside the throne hall was brutal. No armies, no tactics, no formations, only violence. Malric fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because he didn't. The advisor had spent years planning for this moment, years preparing, years surviving, and those years showed. He wasn't merely a politician. He was a warrior. The realization surprised everyone. Even Draven steel crashed through the chamber. Columns shattered, furniture splintered. The fight moved across the hall like a storm. Ryker attacked. Malric countered. Draven joined. Malric adapted. Again and again and again. The advisor refused to fall. Then something went wrong. A mistake. A tiny mistake. The kind battles are built upon. Ryker slipped. Only slightly. One wet patch of blood on the stone floor. One lost step. One opening. Malric saw it instantly. The advisor turned, ignored Draven, ignored everyone, and lunged directly toward Ryker. The killing strike. The final move. The sword aimed straight for the young warrior's heart. Everything happened at once. Draven moved. Too far away. Lyra shouted. Too late. Ryker turned. Not fast enough. Then someone stepped between them. Aria. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no accident. A choice. A deliberate choice. She knew exactly what she was doing. The blade entered her chest. The sound was horrible. Soft. Almost quiet. Yet somehow louder than every battle. The hall froze completely. Malric froze, Ryker froze, Draven froze. The entire world seemed to stop. Aria looked down. The sword protruded through her cloak. Blood spread slowly across the fabric. Dark red, bright red, life red. Then Malric made his final mistake. He hesitated. Only for a second. But a second was enough. Draven's sword struck first, then Ryker's. The advisor staggered backward, shock crossing his face. Not fear. Shock, as if he genuinely believed he couldn't lose. The king advanced, one step, then another. Malric fell to one knee, blood spreading across the stone. The advisor looked around the throne hall, the broken kingdom, the family he failed to destroy, the future he failed to control. Then he laughed one final time, a hollow sound, empty, defeated. And for the first time in 18 years, Lord Malric looked small. Then he collapsed. The war ended. Just like that, not with a speech, not with a proclamation, with silence. The traitor was gone, the kingdom was free, but nobody cared, because Aria was falling, and Draven caught her before she hit the floor. The king dropped to his knees, the same stone floor where he once rejected her, the same throne hall where everything began. Now everything ended there too. Blood stained his hands, warm, terrifyingly warm. Aria, his voice broke. The woman smiled weakly, not because she wasn't afraid, because she was, but because she finally saw her children safe. Ryker dropped beside her, Lyra on the other side. Neither cared about the throne, neither cared about victory. Only her, only their mother. And for the first time since the war began, the kingdom became very quiet. Because everyone understood. The battle was over. The goodbye had begun. Aria's blood soaked through Draven's fingers. Warm, too warm. The king pressed both hands against the wound, as though strength alone could keep her alive, as though refusing reality might somehow change it. It didn't. The throne hall remained silent. The smell of smoke lingered in the air. Broken banners hung from shattered walls. Outside, the kingdom celebrated victory. Inside, a family stood on the edge of losing everything. The healer pushed through the crowd, dropped to her knees beside Aria, examined the wound. The old woman's face immediately changed, just slightly, but enough. Draven saw it, Ryker saw it, Lyra saw it, and suddenly they all understood. The wound was fatal. The realization settled over the room like winter, slow, cold, unavoidable. Aria noticed too. Of course she did. The woman had spent 18 years surviving impossible situations. She recognized death when she saw it. Yet, strangely, she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Because the people she loved were finally together. The sight brought peace. Then she looked toward her children and smiled. A small smile. A mother's smile. The kind that appears even when everything hurts. Ryker. The young warrior immediately leaned closer. I'm here. The words came out broken, barely controlled. Aria lifted a trembling hand, touched his face, the same face she had watched grow from infancy. The same face that looked more like Draven every year. Then she turned toward Lyra. My clever girl. Lyra grabbed her hand instantly, as if letting go might somehow speed time forward. Tears filled her eyes, but she stayed silent, waiting, listening, because she knew these moments mattered. Aria looked between them, then took a slow breath. The truth is, her voice weakened. The room leaned closer. The truth is I told myself I was protecting you. Silence. The woman stared toward the ceiling, as though replaying 18 years of memories. I told myself leaving was the only choice. A pause. I told myself hiding was bravery. Another pause, then the truth. It wasn't. The sword struck harder than anyone expected, even Draven, especially Draven. Aria's eyes returned to her children. It was fear. Silence filled the throne hall. The woman continued. I was hurt. A pause. I was angry. Another pause, and every year it became harder to come back. Ryker shook his head immediately. No. The word escaped before he could stop it. Aria smiled sadly, then gently squeezed his hand. Let me finish. The young warrior fell silent, because deep down, he understood. She needed to say this. Not for them, for herself. The woman looked between both twins, then spoke the words she'd carried for years. I gave you life, a weak breath. But I also gave you 18 years without a father. Lyra's tears finally fell, one after another. The silence became unbearable. Yet nobody interrupted, nobody moved, because some truths deserve space. Then Aria looked toward Draven. The king hadn't spoken, had barely breathed. The guilt in his eyes was impossible to hide. The woman watched him for a long moment, then smiled again. A different smile this time, gentler, older, wiser. We both made mistakes. Draven immediately shook his head. No, the word broke apart. No, Aria. His voice cracked completely. The king lowered his head, then finally said the thing he should have said 18 years ago. This was my fault. Silence, absolute silence. Draven looked toward Ryker. Then Lyra, then the kingdom gathered around them, the nobles, the warriors, the servants, everyone. And he spoke loudly enough for all of them to hear. I rejected her. The first truth, I chose politics over my mate. The second truth, I trusted the wrong man. The third truth, I created the world that forced her to run. The final truth, no excuses, no defenses, no explanations. Just responsibility. The king looked directly at his children, then lowered his head. The fault was mine. The throne hall became silent. Because power rarely admits guilt, kings almost never do. Yet Draven did. And somehow that made the truth even heavier. Aria closed her eyes briefly. Relief washing across her face. Not because the pain was gone, because the truth was finally spoken. Then she looked at her children one last time. The moment had arrived. Everyone felt it. The final goodbye. Aria's fingers tightened weakly around their hands. Promise me something. Ryker nodded immediately. So will I. Lyra nodded too, tears running freely now. Aria smiled. When people give you reasons to hate, her breathing weakened. The room held its breath. Make them prove you wrong. Silence. A long silence. Then she looked between them one final time. My greatest achievement, a breath, was never surviving. Another breath. It was you. The words settled into the room forever. Then Aria looked toward Draven, the man she had loved, the man she had lost, the man she had found again. And for the first time in 18 years, there was no anger between them, only peace. The woman smiled softly, then closed her eyes and never opened them again. Silence, no music, no speeches, no dramatic cries, only silence. Because grief doesn't arrive loudly. Like winter, like night. Like the realization that a voice you've heard your entire life is suddenly gone. And in the center of the throne hall, a family sat together. holding on to the woman who had spent her entire life holding them together, even when they didn't know it, even when they didn't deserve it. And for the first time since the war began, nobody moved, nobody spoke. They simply stayed with her, because some goodbyes deserve silence. Time moved strangely after that. Nobody measured it, nobody cared to. The kingdom had been saved, the war had ended, yet victory felt hollow, because every celebration echoed against an absence. Aria was gone, and the silence she left behind seemed larger than any throne room. The funeral took place 7 days later. Snow covered the capital. White drifts lined the streets. The sky hung low and grey above the city. Thousands gathered, warriors, merchants, farmers, children. Entire families stood shoulder to shoulder, not because they were ordered to, because they wanted to. The kingdom had finally learned the truth. The rejected Luna, the hunted mother, the woman who protected people who never even knew her name. And now, they had come to honor her. The procession moved slowly through the city. The smell of pine torches drifted through the cold air. Church bells echoed across the rooftops. No music played. No speeches interrupted the silence. The people simply walked, and sometimes silence says more than words. Ryker walked at the front, black cloak, sword sheathed, head high. Lyra walked beside him. Silver eyes fixed ahead, neither cried, not because they weren't grieving, but because some grief settles deeper than tears. Behind them walked Draven, alone, no crown, no royal escort, no symbols of power, just a man following the woman he loved. The sight struck people harder than any speech, because for the first time, the king looked human. Months passed, spring arrived, the snow melted, the kingdom slowly healed, villages rebuilt, roads reopened, families returned home. Life continued, the way life always does, even after heartbreak, especially after heartbreak. Yet one thing changed permanently. The throne room, the giant entrance above the chamber once displayed the royal wolf crest alone. Now another name stood beside it, carved into stone, permanent, impossible to erase. Aria Winterborn, guardian of the kingdom, mother of the Heirs, the woman who saved them all. Visitors stopped beneath it every day. Children asked questions, parents told stories, and slowly a legend formed. Not a legend about queens, not a legend about kings, a legend about courage. Before we continue to the final chapter of this story, a quick question. If you were Ryker or Lyra, would you forgive a father who never came looking for you? Or would 18 years be too much to forgive? Tell us in the comments, because the choice they make next defines the future of the kingdom. Now let's continue. Nearly a year later, the kingdom smelled different. Fresh bread, wildflowers, summer rain, peace, real peace. Not the fragile peace that follows victory, the lasting peace that comes from healing. The council chamber buzzed with activity, trade routes, harvest reports, diplomatic requests, the ordinary problems of a healthy kingdom. Lyra sat at the council table, not because anyone gave her the position, because she earned it. Every strategy, every victory, every difficult choice. They had brought her here. The nobles respected her, some feared her. All listened when she spoke. Across the room, Draven watched quietly, pride mixed with sadness, because every accomplishment reminded him of the years he missed. Yet he never interrupted, never controlled, never demanded. He simply listened, learning, the way fathers should. Outside the palace, the royal guard trained in the courtyard. Steel rang against steel. Commands echoed through the morning air. At their center stood Ryker, the new commander, not by birth, not by blood, by merit. The soldiers followed him because they trusted him. The same way Frostclaw had. The same way warriors always followed genuine leaders. A young recruit stumbled during training, embarrassed, frustrated, ready to quit. Ryker helped him stand, offered advice, then made him try again. The scene reminded older soldiers of someone. Aria. The realization always brought a smile. One morning, Draven entered the council chamber. The king paused immediately, because something unusual was happening. Lyra sat reviewing reports. Ryker stood nearby discussing border defenses. Both looked up, then exchanged a strange glance, the kind that precedes a decision. The king felt his pulse quicken. Then Ryker approached. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence felt familiar. The same silence from the healer's cabin. The same silence from the battlefield. The same silence from the throne hall. Years of distance lived inside it. Then Ryker finally broke it. "There's room at the table." The words sounded simple. Yet Draven understood immediately. The invitation wasn't about furniture, or meetings, or politics. It was about family. The king stared, unable to speak. Then Lyra smiled, small, subtle, real, and suddenly the distance felt smaller. Not gone, not erased. Smaller. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens one choice at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of trust at a time. This was one of those moments. Draven slowly sat beside them, not as king, not as ruler, as a father, and for the first time in 18 years, the Blackfang family sat together. Whole, not because the pain disappeared, because they chose something stronger than pain. Years later, visitors entering the throne room would always look up. Always. The name above the entrance demanded attention. Aria Winterborn children would ask who she was. Parents would tell the story. The rejected mate, the hunted mother, the woman who stepped in front of a blade, the woman who saved a kingdom, and every version of the story ended the same way. Not with war, not with betrayal, not with loss, with a family choosing forgiveness over hatred, with children choosing a future over a wound, with a kingdom finally learning the value of the woman it almost lost. And beneath her name, the kingdom flourished, exactly as she always hoped it would. The end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional werewolf stories, Lycan King dramas, hidden heir adventures, rejected mate tales, and powerful family sagas. And tell us in the comments, did Draven deserve forgiveness? Or would you have made a different choice? Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Your support helps us bring more dark werewolf tales to life. Stick around and watch another story from the channel. Your next favorite werewolf tale is waiting for you.